first of all, if it's arbitrary, so there's no evidence of it, there's no reason to entertain this, but someone just proposed there's a God, you can throw it away. You don't even need to acknowledge it. So it's arbitrary. You don't even give it the time of day rationally. And then if something is contradictory, so the idea of God is contradictory. It contradicts itself because everything has a nature, everything has an identity. And this God is not limited by his own identity. He's supernatural. He's not confined by his own nature. So God cannot exist. So I wouldn't say I'm agnostic. I would say there is no God for a number of reasons, and I just hit on two of them. But I understand the role that God plays in lives of people, and objectivism kind of offers that in a more consistent way, in a way that allows you not only to have a so-called higher power, which is reality, but also gives you a moral code and a fully consistent epistemology that allows you to really, really flourish to the maximum potential. So whenever anyone asks me about God, I want to go into that I'm not dismissive of the idea like it's just some fairy tale that someone came up with. I mean, it is, but the reason it's important to people is because it offers people spirituality. It offers people a role for their consciousness to play in life. Because the alternative to religion should not be just materialism. It should not just be to reject consciousness altogether. It is evident that we are conscious as individuals. Yeah. So a lot of people are raised without religion, but they end up discovering it. They end up finding, oh God, oh wow, this is makes my life so meaningful. Especially if someone, struggles with something like addiction, and then they discover something like Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, oh God, yes, God is the answer. So it is. So most atheists today, most atheist upbringing, so to speak, modern Western culture, they've rejected religion, but they've rejected kind of what's good about religion, if you will. Like they've rejected that integrating factor. So the average person raised an atheist, their parents tell him like, there's no God, but be a good person anyway. But what does that even mean? Good by what standard? There's no God, but there's still sort of meaning if you decide what meaning is. Like they offer like subjectivity. You decide what has meaning, and you decide what's moral. But the correct answer is the objectivist, I think, answer is there is no God, just like there's no other supernatural entity, but there is a rational way to look at the world. You need to observe and then integrate, conceptualize by a proper method that is consistent with reality. And then as far as what you should do, and as far as how to pursue meaning in life, there is a rational standard. So it is objective. It is a proper connection between your consciousness and existence, where you're observing and you're playing by reality's rules, and you're taking action in order to preserve your life and to better your life. So, I think that sort of speaks to what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, a lot. So most people who are raised atheists, so to speak, they're still kind of being deprived of something. So yeah, there is religious indoctrination, which definitely, I think, ruins lives. It prevents people. I know what it takes to overcome a religious upbringing, and if someone as fiercely rebellious as me will tell you it's very difficult. What does that say about the capacity of most people? I'm not saying capacity, because everyone I think is capable of, but the likelihood of most people really questioning a religious indoctrination. It's very bad. I'm not pro-religion. But the alternative that's typically been offered in modern times is this materialism. Like I said, this worldview that rejects the role of consciousness and that rejects the need for integration, that doesn't say everything ties to everything else, that doesn't say look at reality and pursue objective values, pursue rational values in order to live. There's this age-old dichotomy between the mind and the body. You see it most clearly, or in one of the most clearest ways, with religion versus materialism. Materialism saying you're just a body. forget consciousness. That's just your body tricking you. You're just a body with no consciousness. And on the flip side, you've got religion saying, oh, your consciousness is the only special holy thing. That's your soul. Forget your body. Your body is animalistic and cheap and finite. The fact that it's finite, the fact that life is finite, they say, means that it doesn't really have any meaning. The opposite is true. The fact that your life is finite makes it valuable.
The atheism is of not giving you this fake idea, this empty illusion of the afterlife, the second chance, because you need to make it worth right now. It gives more value to life. It gives the real meaning to life. And the objectivism, I agree with you that it gives the power of us to make the most reasonable option. We're gonna take it because it would be like in between the options. I've seen you talking to Sargon about that, and he's like, he refuses objectivism because of the selfishness, and he's like, it's just because of the expression of being selfishness, of being selfish. And I actually see that as a trait that was evolutively acquired, because it's like, of course we're going to do the best to the equal. That is kind of like all the other species got that naturally. It's like a natural selected trait, to be good to the equals, to the same species as you. That's a way of growing, getting better, and being able to procreate and pass to the next generation. And I don't see any problem philosophically on the objective, and I actually think it's the best way of thinking because of that. Because yes, I'm not going to do bad to the ones that are equal. I will always try to interact in a good way, or not interact, like you said. Try to not have the negative interaction and try to push to the best. So I think that is kind of natural. That's why we see animals helping each other, even if it's they are not reasonable like our species, as a human species, but we still see them cooperating. And I think the cooperation is that natural selected trait.
Yeah, I mean, so animals, they make very primitive decisions, or they make no decisions at all. Now, as human beings, we have concepts, and we have the concept of morality, like what is the right course of action. So of course it's come to mean, to most people, morality means detached from practicality. It has nothing to do with there's the practical and there's the moral, but of course the two must be the same. They need to be the same in order to live, and that's something that Rand solves. I mean, the question of why Sargon, can't entertain objectivism. You
have to try to talk to him about
it was an exciting thing. Like the first time I ever spoke about objectivism in public was with him on his Thinkery channel. My understanding of objectivism back then, I think, was a lot more elementary than it is now. I'm still learning as I go. But he thought at the time he's basically on board. He read a book called The Ominous Parallels, which is written by an objectivist, an amazing book. And he thought he read it and thought oh yeah, this all makes sense. So he didn't. I think his whole point to me was okay, I'm not sure I entirely agree with objectivism, but I mean, I'm enough on board. But I think a little after that, as he started speaking in such language, saying that ideas are the motor of history. That's the big thesis of that book, saying that philosophy is what shapes a culture, not genetics, not events, but philosophy ultimately influences how a person interprets what's taking place. And people would start kind of making fun of that and kind of being dismissive of that. And he chose Jonathan Haidt as his cop out. He told me, oh no, Jonathan Haidt wrote a book that says, you act first and then you rationalize it. That's what he told me. So it was an exciting thing at the time for me to talk about this. I had this kind of view of people like Sargon and Rubin and all these guys these guys are really looking for a new way. So I kind of wanted to get that conversation going, which was a bit of an interesting thing to see. I've sort of I've graduated from there now. Now I really just look at most objectivists, and I think they're the ones who need to wake up. I think a lot of them, they don't really take. They're too enamored by mainstream intellectuals. Like they're too appeasing, and they think they need validation and approval from people like Peterson and Harris. I think if Ayn Rand were alive, she would just be dismissing people like Sam Harris right out of the bag. And she was, so she used to talk about how like religion has monopolized exaltation and spirituality, like, the meaning in life, that religion has monopolized that, and that it should not be just given to religion, that, rational people should take these things back. And hearing you talk about atheism, I'm thinking like, yeah, like atheism should also be taken from the skeptics. It should be taken away from people like Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins. So that too, like it's come to mean something in its popular usage of this materialistic view of things, this subjectivity, as though everyone just creates their own meaning. I mean,
you think it's a little bit of like the agnosticism fault on like, because I don't know and I cannot prove the negative, there is no God, I have to keep away from like, yeah, it would be possible. And that's when open all this field, all this chance for the postmodernism, everything is possible, and all this subjectivism.
Mm-hmm. It is skepticism that ultimately gave us all these things. David Hume, in my understanding, he said that you can't have principles. You can perceive what's happening, but you can't make a generalization and say that the sun is going to set tomorrow the way that it's going to rise tomorrow the way it rose today. So that skepticism kind of, again, holds omniscience as the standard. It says, unless you're God, you can't, you can't know anything really, because how do you know? So even the atheists, they're still agnostic about the fact that that there's no God, and they're agnostic about everything. So now we're in a state of the world where religious people have the most conviction. They're speaking about morality in the clearest terms. Religious people and socialists who use similar moral language, saying the poor deserve to be treated, to be given stuff, and the rich deserve to have their property taken from them. They're speaking the language of morality. And the skeptics, the centrists, the moderates, they're the ones saying like, hey man, everything's subjective. How do you know? Don't tell me one thing is right and the other's wrong. Don't even tell me what's true. How do you really know? So who's going to win that debate when some people are certain and the other side is completely unsure and doubtful? Obviously, the certain side, the one that with certainty, is going to win.
So you would say like you were more like atheist, like a Hitchens follower, like more on like there is no God, and not like I don't believe. You would win on more on the side there is no God.
Yeah, but a lot more radical than Hitchens. I mean, other than his atheism, what does he really say that's philosophically? Well, I mean, what does he say that's philosophically profound? Nothing really, not very much. I mean, he was a socialist. He supported George W. Bush's ridiculous foreign policy. He was not an integrated person, like most people are not. So I would take that same approach that he uses with logic, saying that there's no God because it's an arbitrary assertion, which I'm assuming is what he said. There is no God. And I would apply it to everything else, apply it to the most basic level of philosophy, all the way up to the top of the political and aesthetic branches of philosophy, and just say, look, there is an objective standard to everything. There's a proper way to look at things, and that is by observing reality and conceptualizing the material that we observe. So yeah, I thought you were comparing me to Hitchens, saying like, I don't remember what I thought you were saying, but yeah, I mean, he was definitely a child of the skeptic upbringing, as most people are, most mainstream intellectuals and most people. So even though maybe he was great on the issue of atheism, and he was great on some other concrete issues, I know he was very big in exposing Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton and all these things. But I mean, philosophically, he was as mainstream as it gets. So people like him, maybe Richard Dawkins was also a big atheist. But what does Richard Dawkins have to say beyond the God question, or even on the God question? He's not an atheist for the correct reasons. So I mean, to me, there's the right answer, and then there's everything else. So I try to focus more on like what is the truth, like what does objectivism have to say, so I can understand that, and that helps me make sense of what I'm hearing from other people.
I've seen you talking about supporting people that not philosophically match to you. That's like, stop supporting Ben Shapiro. Is there anybody that you watch and you follow and you kind of agree?
Yeah, well, I would say Ayn Rand and some of the older objectivists. Some of them are no longer alive, but definitely the oldest generation. The people who studied directly with Ayn Rand, they were certain, and they would speak with clarity, and in essentials, they would get right to the point. And if they were to come across someone like Ben Shapiro, I'm not saying be mean or rude, but get to the point. Say, okay, here's what Shapiro is saying, and here's why it's wrong, and here's what I do like about Shapiro, and here's why he might be better than the postmodernists, but in a certain respect, he's the worst because he's claiming a monopoly on morality, and he's claiming a monopoly on free will, and things like that. So the question of how to treat people and how to judge people and how to evaluate people is a deep question. It's a tough one in the world that we find ourselves in today, but I was in that video, I was really kind of fed up with objectivists who, it's like they've got the answer, but they're sucking up to the mainstream, like it seems to me. And I know that it's a bit of maybe I was in a bit of a mood that day. I had just listened to Ayn Rand.
No, it's a good video.
Well,
I actually wanted to ask you, is that going to happen one day? That talk to Shapiro?
Well, him and Yaron Brook, that I mean, I don't know, with me, or what do you mean? Oh, I would love to, but look, but ultimately, I want a philosopher to talk to him. I want an objectivist philosopher, someone like Harry Binswanger, who's still an active working philosopher of objectivism. Like someone like him on a stage with Ben Shapiro, Leonard Peikoff. He's very much retired now, so it's probably not going to happen, but he's somebody who would get right to the point with Shapiro. We don't really need someone like me to talk to Shapiro. I mean, it would be entertaining, but really, like, we need philosophers. I want to see philosophers like the old school. Like when I did that video on Shapiro, I had just listened to Ayn Rand's, I think her final lecture at the Ford Hall Forum, which was a series she did annually for I think 17 or 18 years. And so it was titled The Age of Mediocrity. Check this out. So good. And, you know, people talk about Ronald Reagan like, oh, he was a good free market guy. He was good she spoke about him like he was the biggest disappointment, not even disappointment, the biggest waste of time in the first place. The fact that he was using religion for his political convictions, and it's just such a good lecture. The way she spoke about religious people and the opposition to religion in America by these scientists who saw no relationship between science and ethics, like how they should behave. She described a televised debate between two scientists and two Christians, and the Christian people were pronouncing moral judgments with clarity and conviction, and the scientists were responding, oh, you don't think we're moral? Why don't you think we're moral? Like begging them for validation. Rand was like mocking them with her voice. She was saying like, oh, you don't, I can't do her accent right now, but she's like, oh, you don't think we're moral? Why don't you think we're moral? She was just looking at both sides and just describing how pathetic the landscape had gotten. I mean, not everyone needs to be angry. Not everyone needs to speak with that same kind of, I guess, level of anger or whatever it is. I mean, there's maybe like when I speak, I tend to go maybe the more humorous route a lot of the time. So I'm not saying someone like Ben Shapiro should be yelled at and called a coward and called all these things. But if you have the truth, just say it, and just say it clearly, get right to the point, and speak with the innocence of a child. I think that's something that Ayn Rand kind of brought that is unusual. She approached things with this fresh set of eyes. she took nothing for granted, and that's what I want to see people doing. I want to see a certain excitement, like, oh no, but let's talk about this. Here's the issue that we need to get to the bottom of. So
would you say that like with Shapiro, the biggest issue would be like the subjectivism, like not accepting objectivism, like the way of, he always talk about how we need kind of like some moral religious standard or some type of morality. Is that the thing?
yes, well, so he would say, oh no, this is not subjective, this is objective because it's coming from God. But what does that mean?
Accept the subjective of a religious morality.
It's saying whatever God decides, it's God's subjective whim. Or if he says, oh no, it's still objective, it's just that God has access to this, like that God is reporting to us. Oh, so God doesn't decide what's moral anymore? So there is an objective standard. So we can just cut out the middleman. We can just look right at reality and say, what are the facts? And then what do the facts imply about values? What does the what does the is imply about the ought?